chapter 9. In chapter 9, Jesus heals a blind man. Gonna do the whole chapter. I'll kind of speed it up in some spots, but it's significant. Just having to do again with Jesus' struggle with the Pharisees and the belief system of of the blind man and the Pharisees. So here we go. Just wanted to mention for background purposes, this particular scripture, it actually is right before this chapter, but it applies to Jesus from throughout his ministry. So I just wanted to read this. So they took up stones to stone him. All right. And Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, and he passed through the midst of them and went away. Now, we sort of have this picture of Jesus and being solemn and whatnot, but Jesus struggled with this. And the chapter 8 is when we did last week about the woman taken in adultery. And this was kind of the end of that, because then Jesus had a little dialogue with the Pharisees, and the Pharisees, the Pharisees did not like Jesus challenging them, and so we just keep that in mind as we go through this story again, and you'll see the Pharisees challenging Jesus once again. Okay. So, John 9, 1 through 5. And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from his mother's womb. And his disciples asked him, saying, Teacher, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus said to them, Neither did he sin nor his parents, but that the works of God might be seen in him. I must do the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night comes when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on these verses here, because at some point we will be talking about in other sessions about Jesus and the light of the world, because in Matthew, the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus says that we are the light of the world. So we're not going to go into that tonight. We're just going to do the story. Okay. So who did sin? All right. Let's look at this. In those days, okay, blindness and deformities, the illnesses, whatever, okay, were blamed on the individuals who were handicapped or on their parents, because they believed in what they call the sins of the father, the sins of the father, so to speak, of the parents. The belief was that this man was blind because his parents were sinners, whatever they had, because it was passed down to children. Now that's back in the ancient days before Jesus, and the children, often children were put to death for the sins of their parents. All right, and then I put Jeremiah here because Jeremiah is one of the prophets who prophesied and said that the day will come when there's not going to be any more of this, that children will be punished because of the sins of his parents. So Jeremiah had prophesied that. And so Jesus, in his teachings, was trying to change that belief, and we'll see a little bit of that here. But again, that's Jesus was trying to fulfill the law, make some changes to the law, but not destroy it. Okay, so we have a blind man that everyone believed, including the disciples, that the blind man was, because he was blind from birth, it had to do with his parents or sinners in the past. Okay. And those two paragraphs there, when Jesus didn't mean, when he said, that the works, so that the works of God might be seen in him, he didn't mean that the man was born blind so that Jesus could heal him. That wasn't his point. Jesus healed the blind man so that he could show God's works might be seen in him, and this through the healing, and that Jesus might carry out his mission of compassion as he had the opportunity. So don't get that mixed up, that Jesus said that's why the man was born, so that he could heal him. No. That's not. He was born blind because he was born blind, and it wasn't because the parents sinned, and it wasn't so that Jesus could heal him. Okay. All right. So now we go to the next. All right. When he said these words, he spat on the ground and mixed clay with his saliva, and he placed it on the eyes of the blind man. Then he said to him, "Go and wash in the baptismal pool of Shiloah." He went and washed, and he came seeing. His neighbors and those who had seen him before begging said, "Is not this he who used to sit down and beg?" Some said, "It is he," and some said, "No, but he resembles him." But he said, "I am he." Then they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" Okay, this is just the neighbors and whatever, who were surprised to see this man, that they thought it was this man, but now he could see, and he was always there as a begging because he was blind. All right. Now, there's some cultural things here that we need to talk about. You notice it said that Jesus spit, um, and the ground to to make clay. Well, spitting, okay, is spitting is the, well, that we call it expectorating, is the most contemptible action one can take in the Near Eastern society, and that goes for today also. It During heated arguments and controversies, Near Easterners often expectorate in others' faces. Spitting almost always initiates serious and dangerous quarrels. So, but holy men could spit and would spit as a form of healing. And it was okay for them to do that. If it was a holy man, that's fine. But otherwise it contemptible. When a holy man spits on a wound or disease, this was the belief now, he rebukes the sickness and the evil that brought on the trouble. This practice is a repudiation of the power of evil. And that was a belief, okay? So Jesus placed clay made with saliva on the eyes of a blind man. He did this. Okay, he did this. Now remember, the healing, Jesus only had to say a word or not, whatever. But he did this because the man expected some sort of familiar healing, okay, from the time, a medicinal thing at the time. And Jesus spat on the soil as a sign that he repudiated the blindness, and not because clay would heal the man's eyes. We need to keep in mind it was not the clay on his eyes that healed him, okay? And so now we go, um, this is the blind man talking now, because now he can see. He answered, saying to them, a man whose name is Jesus made clay and placed it on my eyes. And he said to me, go and wash in the water of Shiloah. And I went and washed, and I see. They said to him, where is he? He said to them, I do not know. So the people, the neighbors, or whoever they were, all right, they brought the blind man to the now blind man that can now see to the Pharisees, um, who had been blind from his birth. Okay, this is very important. Now it was the Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Again, the Pharisees asked him, how did you receive your sight? He said to them, he placed clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Okay, couple things here. Now, when they were talking, they talked about, well, they had seen this blind man uh, begging. Okay, well, that is basically what blind people did. Destitute blind men support themselves by working or begging, but mostly they would beg. It was kind of like a profession there. Um, and some men, although not in need, successfully beg by pretending to be blind. Okay, and that rings so true to me. Uh, it happened then, it happens now. Okay, there were people who were not blind, but they were begging to get money and support themselves. So initially, okay, the Pharisees, all right, they were questioning in their minds whether this man was really blind or one of the pretend beggars. Well, why? Because if it was just one of the pretend beggars, then there really wasn't a healing. I mean, so that was one of the things that was bothering the Pharisees. But of course, the other thing was the fact that it was the Sabbath. And I think we talked about other stories where uh, Jesus healed on the Sabbath, and healing on the Sabbath was against the law. I know that doesn't make sense to us, but um, the the rules about the Sabbath, the laws about the Sabbath, were very rigid, and even today, with Orthodox Jews, the uh, the Sabbath, what you can and cannot do on the Sabbath, are very rigid, very detailed. Uh, and I learned, I research a good bit, just traditionally, beyond our commentaries, and I learned an interesting, just an interesting aside here, and that was that and this too, of course, was bothering the Pharisees. It was, and it was quoted from the Torah, so so it's real. It's not wasn't just somebody saying, but the idea of making the clay from the spit and the soil was against the Sabbath also. It was considered I considered work, I guess. Okay, because there's so many things. So those things were bothering the Pharisees, and the Pharisees also, they wanted to make sure that this man was really blind from birth and not one of the pretenders. And of course, I say be careful what you wish for. Okay. So so then some of the Pharisees said, and remember we talked about the Sabbath and what you do on the Sabbath that's forbidden, it means you're a sinner. This man is not from God because he does not observe the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do these miracles? And there was a division among them. I can just see the Pharisees. These were the authorities. Okay, these were the people that they knew how to pray. They knew their religion, and don't you mess with it. And so I can just see them stirring up among themselves. And so they said to the blind man again, what do you say concerning him who opened your eyes? And the man said, I say he is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked the parents, is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he know? Does he now see? His parents answered, saying, we know that he is our son and that he was born blind. But how he sees now or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself. His parents said these things because they were afraid of the Jews, the Pharisees. For the Jews had decided already that if any man should confess that he is the Christ or the Messiah, which they were always accusing Jesus of, they would put him out of the synagogue. For this reason, his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So they called a second time the man who had been blind and said to him, give praise to God, for we know that this man is a sinner, meaning, okay, meaning Jesus. He answered, saying to them, if he is a sinner, I do not know. But I do know one thing, that I was blind, and now behold, I see. They said to him again, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He said to them, I have already told you, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? What? Do you also want to become his disciples? And this really got to the Pharisees. Then they cursed him. The Pharisees cursed him and said to him, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. And we know that God spoke with Moses. But as for this man, we do not know whence he is. Well, that's, that's very, very true. I mean, they were, look, they were ensconced in their theology, their laws, and their theology and their heritage, so to speak, um, was from Moses. You remember Moses, coming from out of Exodus and whatnot, and that was their belief. So in their minds, there was not going to be anybody, even though it was Jesus. It doesn't matter. There was not going to be anybody that was going to change their minds and uh, uh, and have them leave their theology with Moses and whatnot. Okay. The man answered, saying to them, now this is the blind man that can now see, is talking to the Pharisees. And the man answered, saying to them, this is surprising that you do not know whence he is, and yet he opened my eyes. He healed me. We know that God does not hear the voice of sinners, but he hears the one who reveres him and does his will. And what he's saying is, Jesus can't be a sinner if he healed my eyes. From ages it has never been heard that a man opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man he's talking about Jesus, if this man were not from God, he could not have done this. The Pharisees answered the man, saying to him, you were wholly born in sins, and yet do you teach us? And they cast him out. Now there it is again. Okay. He he was considered born in sin because he was born blind, and his parents would have been sinners. That was the belief. So, so they just dispensed, and they just said, um, "Who are you?" Even though you've been healed, and who are you to teach us? I mean, hey, these Pharisees were they were the top echelon in the authorities. So, okay, and and Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and he found him and said to him, do you believe in the Son of God? Now he's talking to the blind man that he healed. He who was healed answered, saying, who is he, my Lord, so that I may believe in him? Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and he is the one who is speaking with you now. And the man said, I do believe, my Lord. And he fell down and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to him, I have come for the judgment of this world, so that those who cannot see may see, and those who see may become blind. When some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words, they said to him, what, are we also blind? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, we see. Because of this, your sin remains. So, but the Pharisees really didn't know what to do with themselves at this point. Okay. And I have, well, let's talk about, all right, the healed man. It said that he worshiped Jesus, but it wasn't like we worshiped in Anyway, it wasn't like we know worship. The healed man, okay, he knelt before the prophet from Galilee as a token of homage and gratitude. This act also was a sign of self-surrender and loyalty. It was very much the same as people always would kneel at the feet of a king to thank them, to get attention. So very similar. The man who had been born blind worshiped Jesus in acknowledgement of his divine power and in appreciation of his compassion on him in opening his eyes. He had no knowledge of who Jesus was, nor was he interested in his teachings. But the man was convinced by the miracle that Jesus performed, and it doesn't say this here, but just being in Jesus' presence, and respected him as a holy man and as one empowered by God. So again, here is, the woman taken in adultery. Uh, she was a sinner. She was there, okay, but Jesus didn't condemn her or whatnot, and Jesus always went to the um, to the oppressed, the poor. In this case, it's the blind man. Uh, the blind man who could now see automatically just knew, and he was convinced uh, that that was Jesus. But the Pharisees saw all these healings that Jesus did, and they continued to challenge Jesus, to fight him, ultimately arrest him and crucify him, all because they would not change. They could not see anything but their strict uh, laws, theology, uh, and whatnot. And so and of course, they don't believe in Jesus to this day. Um, but the poor, the blind man, who was a beggar and whatnot, no problem. He knew just basically from Jesus' presence, and yes, that he did heal him, but he knew and he felt it. And so I think the problem we have in reading this story is so much like 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 we're like today, like we're doing. Um so I have all right, I have these directly from the commentary, because I don't think I could put words together that would mean more. So forgive me, we're going to read a little bit, but I think it will help. The man who had been born blind and then healed by Jesus could not read a word of the law and the prophets. Nevertheless, he believed in Jesus and venerated him. But the highly educated priests, Pharisees, and scribes, who could read the law and interpret scripture, refused to believe. Pride and hatred had blinded their eyes. They could not see truth. It is common in the Near East to call one who makes mistakes blind. The reference here is to the Pharisees, scribes, and priests. They were learned men and guardians of religion and law. But as far as spiritual understanding was concerned, they were blind. And that's the whole, if you look at all the healings that Jesus did, um, it the and the Pharisees challenged them. The Pharisees had no spiritual understanding. They were just bound up with the laws and their theology and their doctrine. And does that not sound familiar? Anyway, okay, and then we have, all right, the illiterate whom the learned had considered ignorant and blind could more readily see because they were not bound by traditions or false pride. Their eyes were to be opened by the new teaching that explained Scripture for the first time. The illiterate were blind through ignorance, which was not their fault. Many of the religious authorities were spiritually blind. The sin error was great because they could see and read, but they were not willing to understand and accept the true inner meaning of Scripture. Therefore, they were accountable for their own blindness. So I hope that kind of summarizes things. All right. So it was a little long tonight, but I just thought it was a great story. We thank you for your contributions. And so I have this for tonight for us to kind of kick around a little bit and discuss. If Jesus, a poor man and homeless, were to come to the United States from Mexico, a Hispanic with no religious affiliation, and go about the country healing people like Jesus did, would we believe in him, or would we focus on his appearance, where he was from, and smear him on social media, try to get him deported? And would we believe the poor man, whomever, that was healed? So this is just food for thought, and hopefully some of you will have something to say about it. And